Biblical authority, human worth, and worldviews within school curriculum. Let's talk about it. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to this latest episode here of the Courageous Conversations podcast. My name is Jason Ellis, and I'm the Director of Student Ministries here at Briarcrest, and I'm joined by the Jonathan Bernhardt, the academic coordinator for middle school and high school. Did I get the title 100% correct?
You did. That doesn't happen often.
Hey, go me. I'm not going to break my arm patting myself on the back or anything, but I am pretty proud of myself. You know, fun fact, I didn't even know what my title was for the first couple of months I worked here. I thought it was something different, but you know, and finally I looked on the door and I was like, oh, that's actually my title. It's great.
Probably the first time you walked in the office too.
It was
the
probably
busiest person you will ever meet here.
Well, it's more fun to just be everywhere else but my office. So that's how that works. But hey, we are super excited once again that you decided to join us because we are discussing here on the Courageous Conversations podcast, the conversations necessary to share Christ in the year 2024. Because as we've discussed previously, as children of the 90s, we were growing up in a different time where there seemed to be one singular Judeo-Christian framework for viewing the world. It was reflected in our movies. Another great 90s movie. I know in the last episode we mentioned Independence Day. Armageddon. You remember Armageddon?
Yes. I didn't know that you were going there, but I love that movie. Yeah.
Surprise. Golly.
So good.
Bruce Willis gives his life for the world. And, you know, he's there at the end and he's like, wee, Gracie. And he hits the button and then the whole world is saved. And, you know, one of the guys on the shuttle is like, you the man, Harry.
It's almost like there's a sacrificing for the good of others type of love there that it reminds me of another story.
Yeah,
a
greater story.
Yeah,
the goodest news that there is, the good news of Jesus. Yeah, so a lot of our movies had that in it. It was also the 90s when we finally figured out we could do like CGI and kind of do it okay. So everything was CGI'd, like everything. Like it was like we can do pretty much anything with CGI at this point. So we had aliens blowing up the world, asteroids blowing up the world, a lot of things trying to blow up the world. There was
Sandlot.
And then the movie Sandlot. Gosh, that's classic.
I know, right?
Oh, man. What a time to grow up. Well, anyway, we're not in the 90s anymore. So we are here in the year 2024, and there are all these new philosophies and worldviews. And if we were going to do a 3-hour podcast, we could put all sorts of stuff on the screen and break it down. But I was told we need to keep this to about 23 minutes, so we're not going to do that today. But we are going to talk about is one of the worldview questions that we ask that helps us understand the differences in views of reality. I'm reading an apologetics book right now, and this apologetics book, I think, rightfully shows that every worldview is answering similar questions. So Hinduism, Buddhism, communism, Marxism, however you want it, Christianity, Judaism, they're all answering some of these similar questions. And I think probably the first question that every worldview has to grapple with is like, where are we getting what is our authority? Where are we getting our information from? And so there's a lot of different answers to that. You, in fact, lived in majority Muslim countries. So if you put on your Muslim worldview for a second, and I was talking to you and you were Islamic, what would you say your authority was? Where are you getting this information from?
Well, obviously it would be the Quran, right? Allah, Muhammad, right? Like those are kind of the big three. But I would even go on as far as say, even like atheism, something that tries so hard to not acknowledge that there is a God. They still have a worldview and they still have an authority. It's just different. And I think that's what falls through the cracks for a lot of people is they assume that, well, if I don't have or don't prescribe to a religion, then all of a sudden I don't have a worldview.
Sure.
And that is definitely not the case. Like if you are a functioning human, right, then you have a worldview. You may not even know what it is, which is sometimes the scariest part when you speak to people, is whether they realize that, you know what, I believe a lot of these things. I don't know why. I don't know where it came from. I don't know what the authority is. So I think these are good questions just to reflect upon because some people are going to reflect and realize, shoot, I don't know what my authority is.
No, I agree. And I think the way that like YouTube Shorts algorithms work, I mean, you get these like 45-second clips of something, and you can very easily have your worldview shaped by people you don't know whose 45-second videos you're watching as the internet just mindlessly feeds you algorithms to use your eyeballs to make ad dollars, right? So a lot of people who you might be having conversations with, they'll make an ethical assertion. They'll say, this is right, this is wrong. And you go, where are you getting that information from? And they go, I don't know. Usually they don't say it like that. Normally they would say, well, everybody just knows. And I'm like, well, no, I mean, Is murder wrong, right? Well, absolutely. Well, I agree murder's wrong because this book tells me so. This is my authority. But the people will just look at you and say, well, everybody knows murder's wrong. I'm like, well, no. I mean, you taught history. Were there some people out there that thought murder was good?
Well, there were people within history who thought it was good as long as it helped them achieve their goals, which in their case, their worldview would have been their own success, their own power, glory, right, honor, whatever it may be. And so, yeah, I mean, there are people who will create their own morals and ethics all the time to achieve whatever it is their goal is.
Yeah, and when you have that happening, they just become a god unto themselves, right? So that's a Genesis 3 mentality. And so what we wanted to talk about today is authority. Like, where are you getting that information from? And one example I use in my classes all the time is, I mean, I'll have students, they'll ask questions about the Bible. And I love that. I'm like, bring me your question. I don't even claim to remotely have all the answers, but we can figure it out. I've got access to commentaries. I've got access to people who are much smarter than me. Let's ask some good questions. What questions do you have about this book? But the other thing I'll say, if they're coming at me from a different view of reality, I'll say, hey, will you let me use your source of authority, read it, and then begin to ask you questions about it? And, you know, if you're Muslim, you'll hand me a Quran, right? If you're Jewish, you'll hand me the Old Testament, things like that. If you're just living in our kind of secular day and age, you most likely look at me with this dumbfounded look on your face, like, I don't know where I got that from. You will cite something like the science or everyone just knows,
or a certain political affiliation, or someone on TikTok, or a YouTuber, or a professor.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned in our last episode the idea of teaching ethics and morals on a college campus and how wild that would be. Why'd you say that? Let's push a little deeper on that.
Well, that's because by today's standards, in this kind of post-relativistic world, who's to say about morals and ethics, right? Because of this whole issue of authority. Where are these people deriving their authority from? Is it because the culture tells you to do so? Because let's be honest, look back at history. Culture has a lot of really awful things that it has told people to do before. Same thing with, right? What if your authority is in a political affiliation? Well, sorry to say it, but politics is not the poster child of ethics and morals, right? I don't care which side of the aisle you land on. It's just not. I mean, look throughout history. It's just not. Same thing again. You look at influencers, social media type peoples. Think about how many have even been canceled by their own peoples in the last several months or years. I mean, you can't go to any of these other, I'll say, human-based groups because they're humans, which I know sounds really obvious, but
yes,
the idea that because of Genesis 3, right, and the fall of man, like, we are all sinful. We will all mess up. We cannot be entrusted to be the people or the things that are creating these moral or ethical authorities, because then it's just going to be whatever we think, and then we are making ourselves the God that's making this.
Yeah. Well, and I want to give you a very tangible example of what you just said.
Like, examples.
And I also want you, the audience at home, to know that I did not tell him much about this. Like, I want you to be able to have like kind of one of those YouTube reaction videos right now, just watching him react to this. I think that'll at least be somewhat entertaining as we talk about something.
Sometimes,
yeah. That. Well, we're talking about something pretty horrifying. So there is a guy. His name is Peter Singer, and Peter Singer is an ethicist. I mean, that's what his title is.
Himself.
Yeah, I guess that's what he calls himself. But he actually came and spoke at Rhodes College, which is right down the street from where we're sitting right now. I think it was about 2 or 3 years ago.
Oh, okay. Pretty recent.
And one of the things that he says, basically, he says that our worth as humans is attached to our ability to kind of contribute to society,
to your productivity.
Yeah, basically our usefulness.
Okay.
And so I want to read something that he wrote. I think this
I
is
already
back.
don't like where this is going.
this he wrote this in the mid 2000s, but this is a quote from him. He says, "If we compare a severely defective human infant with a non-human animal, a dog, or a pig, for example, we will often find the non-human to have superior capacities, both actual and potential, for rationality, self-consciousness, communication, and anything else that can plausibly be considered moral significance." Then he says, this is a book he wrote, Practical Ethics. He says, "The fact that a being is a human being, in a sense of a member of the species Homo sapiens, is not relevant to the wrongness of killing it. It is, rather, characteristics like rationality, autonomy, and self-consciousness that make a difference. Infants lack these characteristics. Killing them, therefore, cannot be equated with killing normal human beings or any other self-conscious human beings. And then he goes on, he says, this conclusion is not limited to infants who, because of irreversible intellectual disabilities, will never be rational, self-conscious human beings. That is what he says.
Sounds like the first steps on the path to eugenics.
Yeah. I mean, this guy seems like he would be a good poster child for eugenics. And there, if I remember correctly, I'd have to look up the news stories. There were a lot of Rhodes students, to give Rhodes students credit, who were not excited this guy was coming to speak, just because of the way he talked about pretty much everybody who was not, I guess, fully.
Well, if you're not an able-bodied, productive member of society, it sounds like this particular ethics guy says that you can basically just get erased from planet Earth and no one will miss you. Am I summarizing that?
And there's
correct?
And there's a video we watch in class. It's on YouTube. You can go look it up, where he talks about how he and his ethicist partner decided that it was okay to kill these human beings. They made the decision that it was okay to not just take them off of life support, but to actually, kill them, like to actively kill these infants. And it's so funny because we pause it there because he goes, we just made a decision. We were just sitting around, and we, because of our authority we have vested in us by us. Yeah, we decided that we were okay with doing this, right? And so that's what you get when you have humans making these types of decisions. Now, quick pause. The biblical worldview does not teach anything that we just said, right?
Right.
The biblical worldview would say, from the moment of conception, a human life is made in God's image and therefore worthy of protection and dignity, value, and honor, and all of the things. And so it doesn't matter what age or stage or abilities or non-ability or whatever, we look at people and see the imago Dei and see the joy there. This guy does not.
Well, and if you catch it and listen, I think, really carefully, what you realize with Singer, that was the last name?
Yeah, Peter Singer.
Peter Singer. You realize that Peter Singer is more or less creating his own works-based religion. You want to have value in this world, you must be a productive member of society. That is the work that you have to do in order to achieve the goal, which is to be a productive member of society. So this is yet just another example of a kind of works-based belief system where if you can't cut it, you're out. Whereas, again, coming from a Christian perspective in the Imago Dei, you're not working right for salvation, right? But as a believer from salvation,
correct,
right, is the idea.
Yeah. Well, and we've discussed this. I don't know if we've actually discussed it here on camera, but offline we discuss all the time. Then, like, every other worldview is doing what? They're saying, hey, you got to earn it. You got to earn it. You got to do the work. You got to anytime I see something like do better, try harder. Our culture says that a lot. I'm like, well, that's just works based. Whatever it is works based. Yeah. But I don't think it really stops there, because once you get on college campuses, you're going to be exposed to all of these things. In fact, as I was discussing Peter Singer, one of the guys we were around was like, oh, I heard about that guy in my philosophy class in college. Like, so. I have I know a person who is attending a rather large university and taking a class dealing with these issues. And one of the things that, to the professor's credit, this person had sent me the notes, but to the professor's credit, they quoted, I guess, the quote that says, "If God is dead, then everything is permitted." In other words, like if there is a God who created the world and he is the moral authority, then he is the one who gets to tell us what is right and what is wrong. And you can rail against your creator all you want, but he's right and you're wrong because he's the one that created you. But then the notes go on to say this: God isn't right all the time. Let that sink in for a second. God isn't right all the time. In the Old Testament, he burns cities, tells Abraham to commit human sacrifice, floods the earth, killing everyone. He regrets making human beings. He says that in Genesis 6. Shows remorse when he floods the earth, turns a woman to a pillar of salt, kills a lot of babies, mauls children with a bear, etc. And so that's interesting. If we did have 3 hours, we could deal with each one of those, but we don't. I would just say that if you look at the context of God's holiness and human sinfulness, those issues, and then actually press down on what is actually happening with all of those issues, what you see is a lot of God's graciousness, but you also see his holiness and justice playing out at some point because he's holy and we're sinners. Nevertheless, isn't it interesting, John, that you got right here someone who is, I guess, having some sort of authority saying that from our perspective, that we can judge God not being moral. What stands out to you about that being slightly suspicious.
Well, it's just that idea, like we talked about in the intro, about authority, right? In that case, we are judging God based off our morals that we, the creation, have thus are now trying to impose, I should say, on God, rather than the other way around. Rather than looking at our Creator and being like, "What have you set up for us?" Right? And in terms of morality, ethics, and whatnot. Again, things like justice, like what is God's justice, rather than saying, "Well, according to our justice, right? God doesn't." I mean that.
Yeah.
Totally backwards.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it just puts Genesis 3. You will be like God, knowing good from evil. In other words, you get to create your own good and evil, and that's an incredibly dangerous place for people to be. Now, once again, we're parents. I've got the older kid. I've got the 12-year-old in middle school, but we're both trying to raise kids up in a day and age where Armageddon is not showing in movie theaters. You like that callback? That was a good callback. Yeah, that was good. That just came in. Brought it right back to the very beginning of this podcast. We're trying to raise kids in a day, once again, no Armageddon in theaters. But it's helping them recognize that once they get out in the world, there's going to be a lot of people who make assertions about right and wrong, good and evil, up and down, left and right, the whole 9 yards. And we've got to recognize that we've got one authority, and it's God's word. And this is the authority that tells us that what is good, what is bad, what is right, what is wrong. And that when we go onto when our students launch onto a college campus, when we're engaging our kids, when you're engaging your coworkers, you've got to recognize everybody's got an authority. Everybody's got something they're drawn from. Everybody's got something that they're. And let's talk real quick. I don't know if we even planned on doing this, but why not? We're gonna call an audible.
Yes, love it.
What in the textbook world, right? You work in curriculum world and all of the things. Does curriculum have a worldview? Any curriculum you pick, will it have a view of reality?
Oh, of course. And having a background in history, the goal was always to have the most objective history textbooks. In fact, I actually remember one of the greatest compliments I've ever received from a parent is they asked their student, what do they think I voted in an election? They said, "Hey, can you pick out your U.S. history teacher's, party?" And the kid was like, "You know what? I can't. I cannot tell which side, And to me, that was a great compliment because in history, objectivity usually is what you try to kind of land the plane and let students decide on their own what it is, that they think and believe. And so, in textbooks, you absolutely try to find it, but there's nothing's really ever truly objective. I mean, everything has its own thoughts. And I mean, authors do a good job and editors do a good job of trying to mitigate some of that, but it always creeps in there.
Oh, for sure.
Just the little comments, or there might be an adverb in there that like clearly sways a sentence one way or another, so there's always little things. But yes, everyone from textbooks to people you talk to social media, everyone has some type of purpose, a point of view. They have an audience that they're targeting, right? Again, in order to pursue or push that point of view, right, for their ultimate purpose. I mean, it's all there.
Yeah, and one of the things I've learned over the last couple of years, kind of studying where our culture is and what's happening in the world. Karl Marx in the Communist Manifesto, what did he say about education?
Oh, he's a big fan of public education. In fact, it's one of the core beliefs of the Marxist, I guess, version of communism, is that, yes, you should have public education for everyone. However, right, there's a little bit of asterisk to that.
What's the asterisk there?
And that is that it is in order to teach the very communistic ideology, and again, those outcomes that we've talked about, in order to kind of flip the script of the 1840s on its head, was the ultimate goal. And so it kind of gives the same vibes of the kind of, indoctrinate the youth, right? And then you'll have them as adults that Hitler would try to implement with the Hitler Youth Program in Germany in the 30s. So you can kind of see how that has some long-standing impacts within history of get them while they're young in public education kind of mentality.
Yeah. Well, and one of the words that I've heard to describe this, I'm using a book that I'm reading about kind of all these different moments that we're in right now, but it's critical pedagogy. I know, big fancy. I know that's right up your alley with those types of words, right? But it's essentially saying that we're going to teach all of the curriculum we're teaching through this lens of the kind of oppressor-oppressed dynamic that our society in the West, the Judeo-Christian society, is oppressive and wrong, and we're going to use education to teach that. And there was a guy named Paulo Freire who that was his thing. Like he wrote about how we need to use education to do this. And this guy is well cited in all sorts of educational material. So when we talk about here at Briarcrest, we teach through a biblical worldview. We teach the gospel to a biblical worldview. Like that means something, especially when juxtaposed against other worldviews and all of the other things that they're teaching. And I heard this illustration somewhere as to kind of what this would look like. Like if you want to split a class and use the, mathematics as a way to teach this worldview is, let's say you got a bunch of 9-year-olds and you're doing like a math word problem. And you would say something like, there are 7 roller coasters at the Magic Kingdom in Disney World. 2 more are being built. How many roller coasters will there be when, in a year? And the answer is obviously 9. 7 plus 2 is 9. But what you do is when you're having that conversation with your class, you look at the class and you go, all right, class, how many of you have been to Disney World? Some of the class might raise their hand. And you go, how many of you haven't been to Disney World? And some other people. And then you go, why do you think it is that some people get to go to Disney World and other people don't get to go to Disney World? Do you think it's fair that only some of you have been to Disney World and some of you haven't been to Disney World? And then what you're subtly doing is you're dividing the class into the haves and the have-nots, and then you're beginning to say that like our society that has created a Disney World where it costs $738 to get into the park for a one-day pass. I don't know if it's actually that, but right, it's saying that it's wrong to have this society that is operating in this way, right? So that would be strictly like communism, but that's what can easily happen in a classroom. And now the same's true here. When you got math teachers, we've got math teachers in this high school that I've seen them do it, where they'll use opportunities within their math class to highlight the gospel and the beauty of the scriptures and the beauty of like God's design and order.
Yeah.
But everybody's teaching from an authority. So,
well, the difference is we will go out and say which authority we're using, and we will speak about it, very blatantly and again, courageously.
Yeah.
See what I did there?
Yeah. I like that. I like that. Hey.
Whereas
Right,
a lot of these other, organizations, institutions, schools, companies, whatever, oftentimes they're not really sharing the, authority. They're not sharing the worldview. It's either hidden in between the lines or it requires a little bit more of an investigation to it. Or they don't even know, and they're just saying, well, we're getting yelled at by a bunch of people for all these things. Let's try to basically just pander to them for a little bit and then kind of roll out afterwards.
Well, I love the fact that out on the road it says, what, biblical, not cultural, or scriptural, not cultural? Yeah, right on the road. Because, we want to be upfront about it. We teach from a biblical lens, and that's the lens we believe to be true, and that's the lens that I would argue is true, and I'd be happy to have that conversation on a 3-hour podcast.
But with gentleness and respect.
Oh, for sure. And that's the beauty of what we get to do is we get to have it in such a way where we're not trying to own the opposition, but we're literally just trying to show them the beauty of Christ. And so, all right, any last words on just the idea of authority and sharing Christ and what it looks like to share Christ in such a manner where we're pointing out that you have a different authority and we're able to do that with gentleness, and what those courageous conversations could look like?
Well, and I know you and I kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, this idea of authority, where you get your authority to drive your morals and ethics and things of that nature, which what we spent the vast majority talking about today, but also the idea of how you then operate and treat your local or national or state authorities, or just authorities in your work, authorities in your business, authorities on the youth sports field, right? This idea though that authorities are all around us all of the time, and working in education, we get to see that kind of student usually to a kind of authority in their teacher ratio, and seeing how they react and respond and interact, and how much they watch us, right? And how much these kids will glean from how you respond to, again, if you have a supervisor tell you to do something, are you going to grumble and complain and whine and fuss about it? And you are showing to that child that authorities are not to be respected, right? Authorities are to be belittled or have your eyes rolled to them, or, things of that nature. Now, granted, if your position or person of authority is telling you to do something that is heinous and terrible and whatever, obviously there's a time and place for that. But the idea is that if you're just asked to do something, again, I think of youth sports, and if a ref, calls a foul on your kid and you just pop off on that ref and you're cursing at him, and it's 8-year-old little league, it's a 19-year-old kid who's doing the reffing anyway. It's like what you're showing to your own child is that, it's okay not to respect authority. And so I just think that this conversation, I know you and I have talked, is much bigger than just focusing on the morals and ethics of the biblical authority, but it's how that authority then influences so many other things, and how if you start stepping away from understanding where really all morals and ethics and authority come from, which is Scripture, you're just going to get in this hot mess.
I know, and we're discipling our kids in that way, right? And so I want my kids at home to see me submitting to biblical authority. First of all, the actual Bible, believing that, but then also Yeah, I've got bosses. You've got bosses. There's people in my life I need to submit to, and I need to be able to submit to them. Once again, as long as they're not calling me to sin. If they're like, "Hey, we need you to go rob the First Horizon down the street," I'm like, "No. I got a verse for that one. We're not doing
Because
that."
that goes back to your ultimate authority.
Correct. But they need, because I've also seen the flip where you have kids who parents might not want to listen to the authority, and they're discipling their kids not to listen to authority, and that doesn't end well either. And so I always have to be checking my heart, like, am I joyfully submitting to the authority that God has graciously placed in my life? And I think that's a thing that we do that ultimately because we love Jesus, because of the gospel, because God sent Christ to die for us. Christ submitted to the authority of God the Father in the garden for our sake, right?
Yeah. And it's not about not asking questions, right? I mean, you think about, like, there's a way to respectfully, again, kindly say, like, okay, I get you're asking me to do this, or I understand. Can you just explain it to me, right?
Yep.
Like, can I know the why behind this?
Yeah.
And if you say, well, you know what, that's the way we've done things. Maybe we want to change it. Can we try this again? There are ways to even offer suggestions, and especially in the workplace and things like that, that can be really helpful, that are not necessarily disrespectful in the way that you're approaching the authority, right? I guess that comes down to it. It's like there are, it's not like your authority figure says one thing, you just automatically do it, no questions asked. There are ways to have those conversations, but there are ways to have those conversations that, again, are respectful and help to show that to the next generation.
Well, and I think with our own kids, like, you can ask me those questions, and I don't want the answer to be because I said so. Now, there might be hey, the house is on fire. Why are we running out the door? Why do I have to leave in the middle of the night? Because I said so, right? Like,
tornadoes is the big one. Why are you waking me up at 2 a.m? We just got to get down there.
Yeah,
right?
there could be moments with that, but like, I love sitting my kids down and being like, hey, here's the reason why. And I think that's really helpful as we just navigate authority. But ultimately, the beauty that we have as Bible-believing Christians is we have a good God who's given us a good word that we can submit to and walk in and help other people see, hey, what is your authority? Because I'd love for you to be able to open up mine and read it. And so with that being said, any last words?
Oh, gosh. I'd say the last, and I actually had this thought the last episode, and I didn't say anything, so we were probably bumping up on time, but I kind of want to just throw it in here. It's going to seem a little left field, so I apologize. But this idea of this courageous conversation in our authority, having these conversations, whether it's with your kids, again, coworkers, people you meet on the street, who knows, where you're sharing about Christ and his authority, the whole idea of the courageous part, the courage, is a lot of people feel uncomfortable or awkward having these conversations, but it's because they put so much pressure on themselves, like we kind of talked about, to be right and to know everything. The idea is that your authority is in Christ. It's in God. It's in the Word. You are called to love on people, to share the gospel. I mean, you are not called to win the argument. I know we kind of mentioned that, but if you feel that pressure and that's keeping you or preventing you from having these tough conversations, just note that your job is not to know all the right answers. It's to know the gospel, love other people well, to love on them. And hopefully that takes some of the pressure off.
Absolutely.
And encourages people to find some more of that courage kind of in that mentality.
Yeah. Well, Jason Ellis and Jonathan Bernhardt have never changed anyone's hearts, right? Now, Christ has probably used us in his good pleasure to do that, but like, it's ultimately him. And we're just called to be obedient. And that's the beauty of what we get to do.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, hey, great last word. We once again want to thank you for joining us for this latest episode of Courageous Conversations. We would love for you to like and subscribe, maybe to leave a positive comment, because guess what? More episodes are coming your way, and we hope that you join us then.